Good morning. My name is Emily Scarola, and you might recognize me from playing the piano here on Sunday mornings with the choir. When I was invited to share my story with you today, I admit that my first thought was, well, what is my story? I really feel like I'm just an ordinary person and I'm just trying to live a good life day to day. So I prayed about it, and almost immediately a verse from Luke popped into my mind. Put out into deep water and lower your nets for a catch. I come from a faithful family, and I've always believed in God, but as I reflect on my life, I realize that God has taken ordinary circumstances and has worked in extraordinary ways, calling me over and over again to put out into the deep and to trust Him with my life. So one of my first experiences with this came when I was a senior in college, and I was toying around with the idea of doing a year of service after graduation in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. Each year, our campus ministry organized a service trip to Mexico for a select group of seniors over Christmas break. I had been wanting to go on this trip since I was a freshman, and now that I was a senior, I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to essentially try out a service-oriented lifestyle for a week. But through a series of incidents completely outside of my control, I missed the application deadline by 1 hour. I called up our campus priest and I begged him to let me in, but he would not budge, and I just couldn't believe it. He did offer me an alternative, though, which was another service trip over Christmas break, and it was the next best thing to a week in exotic Mexico. It was 5 days in Camden, New Jersey. So I begrudgingly signed up for the trip. And even though my heart was far from being in the right place, I decided to trust God's plan for one of the first times in my adult life. So as it happened, the 5 days that I spent in Camden were life-changing for me, and I did go on to be a volunteer in Brooklyn, New York as a result. It just so happened that our retreat directors in Camden that week were Jesuit volunteers themselves, and that intense inner-city experience of service was exactly what I was looking for. So my friends who went on the Mexico trip told me that it mostly ended up being a sightseeing trip after all. Coincidence? Then when I received my volunteer placement, I was a little bit disappointed that I wouldn't be able to use my music education degree at all. But that same week, I got a call from the Corps asking if they could switch my placement to a Brooklyn middle school who wanted someone to start a music program for their students. Coincidence? I sat back and I watched the Lord work out every single detail of that experience, and all it took was me surrendering to His plan and letting Him work in my life. So God recently challenged me again to surrender completely to Him. Fast forward a few years, I had met my now husband, Jim, and moved out of Brooklyn after 3 years. We got married and bought a house and just kind of fell into the normal rhythms of life. And everything was going great except for one piece. About 2 years ago, we were diagnosed with infertility. So if you haven't gone through something like this, I'm not sure that I can really communicate to you how heartbreaking it is. I had loved children my whole life, and everything I did was kid-focused, from babysitting and nannying to choosing a career in teaching and education. And of all people, I wasn't able to have children myself. So every month was an emotional roller coaster, and Jim and I were disappointed again and again. But we were also very blessed. From the beginning of our marriage, we had used the Creighton method of natural family planning, which also happens to be a medically and scientifically credible way to treat infertility. We hadn't planned to use the method for that purpose, but finding ourselves in the situation we were in, we were amazed to learn that we already had an entire history recorded that our doctors could reference to help us find and understand the underlying issues. And we were already very connected to a supportive group of pro-life medical professionals who were able to work with us while respecting my body, our marriage, and the dignity of life along the way. And during this time, God was calling me deeper and deeper into relationship with him. I don't know if I've ever prayed harder or more sincerely than during that time. I cried out to God and I asked why a lot, and I really tried to believe it when I said, God, not my will, but yours be done. I remember a moment when I was driving in my car to work, and I was disappointed after another negative pregnancy test. But I was watching the most beautiful sunrise, and I actually said out loud in my car, God, I do not understand this, but I promise that I will continue to trust you day after day, no matter what you throw at me. You know, I don't think God needed to know that from me, but I needed to know it, and I needed to say it to him. I saw our prayers changing over this time, and I saw our hearts becoming more aligned with God's heart. Jim and I came to understand that there was a very real possibility that God's plan didn't involve us having children. It took a really, really long time to accept that and to acknowledge that we would be incredibly disappointed, but that we were capable and ready to surrender everything to God's will. I came to one of the prayer and healing nights here at St. Norbert's, and I just cried and I released my life once again to our amazing God. And then the next month we found out I was pregnant. This past November, Ethan James was born. And even after holding him in my arms, I still couldn't believe it was true. I know God doesn't always answer prayers in this way, and that even when things don't turn out the way we want them to, there's always purpose in it. But I am still in awe of how, in this instance, God fulfilled our desires in ways beyond what we ever could have imagined. And I think it's just perfect because even though the team at St. Norbert's didn't really know my story when they asked me to speak, that I'm sharing this with you on my first Mother's Day, which is just so special to me. So maybe you feel like I do at the beginning, that you're just a normal person and you're trying to live your life the best you can each day. And at first glance, you may not think that you can always see God working in your life. But he is alive and he's doing amazing things with each of us if we just have the courage to put out into deep water and to trust him with our lives. Thank you.